I am Kevin Marshall, and I live in Portland, Oregon, a city that feels like it belongs to a different country sometimes. The rain comes down for months straight, and people here walk around with this permanent gloom baked into their faces, like they've all got somewhere better to be, but they're just too tired to get there. I work as a claims adjuster for an insurance company, and every single day I walk the same 6 blocks from my apartment to the MAX station, and every single day nothing happens. That's what I tell myself anyway. Until last Tuesday. I stepped out of my building at exactly 7:14 in the morning, coffee in hand, eyes half closed, and this woman standing at the bus stop across the street looked right at me. Not through me, not past me, at me. And she smiled. Not a polite nod or one of those half-committed Seattle smiles people use when they want you to know they've acknowledged your existence. No, this was a real smile, the kind that pulls the corners of your mouth up until your eyes squeeze shut, the kind people use for birthdays and babies and things that actually make them happy. I didn't think much of it at first. People smile sometimes. It's a thing humans do. But then I kept walking, and this guy coming out of the corner bodega did the same thing. Looked straight at me and smiled like we were old friends, like I'd just told him the funniest joke he'd ever heard. I nodded back, confused, and kept moving. By the time I got to the station, 4 more people had done it. 4 more perfect strangers, grinning at me like I'd won something. I checked my shirt in the MAX platform mirror, thinking maybe I had something stuck to my face, or my fly was down, or I'd grown a second head overnight. Nothing. I looked normal. I looked like Kevin Marshall always looks on a Tuesday morning, which is to say, tired, unremarkable, invisible. But these people kept looking at me, kept smiling, and I couldn't figure out why. I got on the train and sat down, and this woman across the aisle looked up from her book and smiled at me. And then a guy standing by the door smiled at me, and I started to feel this weird, prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Like I was being watched, but also, somehow, like I was being welcomed. Both things at the same time. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense, and I couldn't stop thinking about it all through the ride downtown, staring out the window at nothing, trying to convince myself it was nothing, trying to convince myself that I wasn't starting to feel like I was being slowly, gently, completely consumed by all these people I'd never met who somehow already seemed to know me better than I knew myself. I figured it was some kind of collective hallucination, maybe a glitch in whatever invisible social contract keeps strangers from acknowledging each other in public spaces. People in cities don't smile at random pedestrians. It's basically rule number 1. But the thing about that morning that really stuck with me, the thing that made me replay it over and over on the MAX ride downtown, was that none of those smiles looked wrong. They weren't creepy or exaggerated or any of the things you'd expect from someone smiling for no reason at a stranger. They looked genuine, like these people were genuinely, completely happy to see me, Kevin Marshall, in my gray rain jacket with coffee on my tie, shuffling toward the train like I do every single day. I got to work and mentioned it to my coworker Denise, just as something to talk about while the coffee machine did its thing. She looked at me with this expression I couldn't read, not quite concern, not quite confusion, and she smiled. It was the same smile. That exact same smile, right down to the way her eyes disappeared, and her whole face seemed to rearrange itself around this expression of pure, inexplicable joy. I laughed it off, told her she must have heard the joke, even though I hadn't made one, and went to my desk. But I kept thinking about it. All day, I kept thinking about it, about those smiles, about how none of them had been at me and for me at the same time, like a word I'd forgotten the meaning of, At lunch, I went to the food cart pod on Fifth Avenue, and the guy making my tacos smiled at me. At the crosswalk, a woman walking her kid smiled at me. In the elevator at my building that evening, my landlord smiled at me, and I realized I had never seen him smile before in the 3 years I'd lived there. He was always just this grumpy guy who yelled about recycling fees. Now he was looking at me like I was his favorite person in the whole building, like he was genuinely, completely, inexplicably happy that I existed. I went home and locked my door and stood in my kitchen and realized I was afraid. Not of the smiles themselves, but of what they meant. Of what it meant that every single person I encountered seemed to be looking at me with the same expression, the same overwhelming, inexplicable warmth. Like I was something precious, something they'd been waiting for, something that had finally arrived after a very long time. The phone rang and I jumped, and when I picked it up, my mom was on the other end, calling to check in, and when I answered, she was smiling. I could hear it in her voice before she even said hello. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and she was smiling, and I could hear it in her voice. That same smile, that same expression of overwhelming joy. And I hung up the phone and stood there in my kitchen with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, and I just knew that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, I left early. Not because I wanted to avoid anything in particular. I told myself there was nothing to avoid, but because I wanted to see if it would happen again. If I could prove to myself that it was just random chance, just a weird fluke of a morning. I stepped outside at 6:45, the sky still dark, the streetlights still on, and I walked the whole 6 blocks with my eyes wide open, actually looking at people for maybe the first time in months. It happened again. The man walking his dog at the corner of my block, full smile, teeth showing. The teenager waiting at the crosswalk, same exact smile, like a mirror image. The barista at the coffee cart by the station, smiling before I even got close, like she'd been expecting me. By the time I got to the platform, I was counting them. 12 smiles in 6 blocks. 12 perfect strangers, all looking at me, all smiling the exact same way. My hands were shaking by then, and I wasn't sure if it was cold or fear or something else I didn't have a name for. I got on the train and sat down, and this woman across the aisle looked up from her phone and smiled at me. Same smile. I got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way to work, and I counted 31 smiles on that walk. 31 people who all looked at me like I was the best thing that had happened to them all day. At work, I couldn't focus. I kept looking at people, looking for differences, looking for some sign that this was all in my head, or that there was a reason, an explanation, something I could point to and say, "Oh, that's why, I get it now." But there was nothing, just smiles. Just those same exact smiles from everyone who looked at me. And I started to notice something else too, something that made my stomach drop when I finally put my finger on it. The smiles weren't just similar, they were identical. Same width, same depth, same crinkle around the eyes. It was like someone had copied and pasted the exact same expression onto 100 different faces, and I was the only one who could tell the difference between real and fake. Except I wasn't even sure anymore if I could tell the difference, if there even was a difference, if any of these smiles were real, or if they were all just variations on some original smile that something or someone had designed and distributed and forced upon everyone I encountered. I went to the bathroom at lunch and locked myself in a stall and just sat there, breathing, trying to slow my heart rate, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was stressed, that I needed to take a vacation. But then I heard someone come in, and I looked under the stall door, and the shoes that were standing there, waiting, belonged to Gary from accounting, and Gary was smiling. I could see it in the reflection on the floor, this huge, impossible smile, and I stayed in that stall for 45 minutes, just sitting there, waiting for Gary to leave. And when I finally came out, Gary was still there, still smiling, and he looked at me and said, "Taking a while in there, Kevin?" And he smiled, and I ran out of the bathroom without washing my hands, and I went back to my desk, and I didn't know what to do anymore. I stopped sleeping that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself I was losing my mind, because the alternative, that 31 strangers on a single morning had all decided to smile at me for reasons I couldn't understand, felt worse than any kind of breakdown could have been. I got up at 4 in the morning and looked out my window, down at the street below, and there was a man standing on the corner across from my building. Just standing there, in the rain, looking up at my window, looking right at me, and he was smiling. I called the police at 5 a.m. and told them there was someone watching my apartment, and they said they'd send someone, and an officer showed up 20 minutes later and talked to the man. And the man smiled at the officer too, and then the officer smiled at me when he knocked on my door to tell me everything was fine. There was nothing to worry about. The man was just a jogger who'd lost his way. He was very polite, the officer said, very friendly. He was smiling the whole time I talked to him. I quit walking to the Max station after that. I started taking the bus, switching routes, wearing sunglasses and a hat, anything to make myself less visible. It didn't help. They found me anyway. They always found me. On the bus, at the grocery store, in the bathroom at work when I locked myself in there just to breathe. Someone would open the door and they'd be smiling, and I couldn't make myself smaller or less seen or less known by all these people who had never seen me before and somehow already loved me more than anyone ever had. I started to notice something else too. When they smiled at me, when they looked at me with those identical expressions of overwhelming joy, I started to feel this strange sensation, this pulling feeling in my chest, like something was being taken from me, or given to me, or both at the same time, like I was being filled up with something that was warm and pleasant and completely, utterly wrong. I started dreaming about smiling. In the dreams, I was smiling, and everyone around me was smiling, and we were all just standing there smiling at each other. And the smiles kept getting wider and wider until they split our faces open, and I would wake up in the middle of the night with my cheeks aching, and I would be smiling in my sleep, and I didn't know how to stop. I called in sick to work and said I had the flu, and the HR lady on the phone smiled when she told me to feel better, and I could hear it in her voice, that same smile. And I went to my doctor the next day because I couldn't take it anymore. And my doctor smiled at me from the moment I walked in until the moment I left. And she told me there was nothing wrong with me. Everything looked fine. She said I just needed to rest and relax and maybe take a vacation. And she smiled. And I went home, and I didn't know what to do anymore. And I didn't know who to trust. And I didn't know if I could trust myself, because I caught myself smiling in the mirror one morning, and I didn't know how long I'd been smiling, and it felt good. It felt so good, and that was the scariest thing of all. 3 weeks after that first morning, I stopped leaving my apartment entirely. I called in sick to work and drew the blinds and sat in the dark with my phone, watching the news and waiting for someone to mention it, waiting for there to be some explanation, some medical condition, some mass hysteria with a name and a cure. Nothing came. No one else seemed to notice. The world kept moving outside my window, and everyone kept smiling, and I couldn't tell anymore if I was running from something or if I was the only person in the world who wasn't in on the joke. On the fourth night, I got hungry enough that I had to go out, and I went to the corner store at midnight, and the man behind the counter smiled at me, and the woman buying milk smiled at me, and the kid restocking the shelves smiled at me. And I smiled back because I couldn't help it anymore, because the smiling had gotten inside my head and made a home there. And I understood now that it wasn't about me at all. It was about the smile itself, this thing that moved between people like a word in a language I'd never learned. I walked home in the rain, and every single person I passed smiled at me, and I smiled back. And somewhere in the middle of all that smiling, I realized I couldn't remember what my real smile felt like anymore. I couldn't remember if I'd ever had one. I couldn't remember a time before the smiling started, or if there even was a time like that, or if I'd just imagined myself into existence, and the smiling had always been there, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to join. I'm Kevin Marshall. I live in Portland, Oregon, and everyone I meet smiles at me like they know something I don't, like there's a secret at the center of all this that's so good. They can't help but share it, and I keep walking, I keep smiling back, and I don't know anymore if I'm the one being watched or the one finally seeing, or if there's even a difference anymore, or if there ever was. I went back to work on Monday. What else was I going to do? Stay in my apartment forever? Hide from every stranger on the street who smiled at me? And anyway, by then, the smiling felt normal. It felt right. When people smiled at me, I felt this warmth spreading through my chest, and I smiled back, and they smiled back, and we just stood there smiling at each other, and it was fine. It was more than fine. It was the best thing I'd ever felt. Like I belonged somewhere, like I was finally part of something, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Last night I went out to a bar with some coworkers, and everyone there smiled at me and I smiled back, and at one point I looked around the room and everyone was smiling. Everyone was looking at me and smiling, and it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And then I realized, looking in the mirror behind the bar, that I was smiling too, and my smile was just like theirs now, just like everyone else's. And I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing or a thing at all. And I raised my glass and I smiled, and everyone else smiled back. And I understood now that this was what it felt like to be loved. And I understood that it was terrifying. And I understood that I didn't want it to stop. And I went home, and I looked in the mirror, and I smiled at myself, and I smiled back, and I couldn't tell where I ended and the smile began, and I think that's okay. I think that's just how it works now. The smiling is everywhere, and I'm part of it, and everyone smiles at me, and I smile back, and we're all just smiling. All of us, forever. And I don't remember what it felt like before, and I don't think I want to. I'm Kevin Marshall. I live in Portland, Oregon, and every stranger on the street smiles at me, and I smile back, and I don't know if I'm happy or scared, or both, and I don't think it matters anymore, and I don't think I care, and I just keep smiling, and I don't want to stop. And I don't think I ever will.